Now we'll hear from our speaker. Nathaly Agosto-Filion works out of the Office of Climate Resilience at DEP. In this capacity, she works with a team to accelerate the implementation of statewide resilience policy and programs developed by the Interagency Council on Climate Resilience. Prior to joining DEP last October, she served as the Chief Sustainability Officer for the City of Newark, Resiliency Manager with Sustainable New Jersey, and Program Officer with the Institute for Sustainable Communities. Throughout her career, she has helped to develop, design, and deliver national and regional capacity building programs for local government and community-based climate and sustainability practitioners. She has a bachelor's and master's degrees in natural resources from the University of Vermont. Nathaly?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Nathaly Agosto-Filion, and this morning I've got about 15 minutes of presentations for you that'll run through the activities of the Office of Resilience. And so just to kind of set the stage here, I do want to recognize that all of our work is dictated by state policy, which was adopted in 2019 or passed in 2019, executive. And I'll get into that a little bit. Not too far away. Of course. Does this sound better?
Yes.
Okay, thank you for that. So I'll just start by saying that my hope here is to walk folks through a very brief overview of climate resilience work that's led out of the Office of Climate Resilience, and we'll come back to this, but I started with it to give you a sense that I'm starting at the state level, sort of looping around to regional work that's captured in our Resilient NJ program, and then ending with just a little bit about Blue Acres and some of our community outreach efforts around risk management. So I want to lead with the punchline. You know, there's a lot of us here that are very busy, have very limited time. And so basically my hope is that you walk away with a sense that this is an invitation to be engaged on this topic with DEP's Office of Climate Resilience, particularly recognizing that there's a summit coming up in a couple months, and obviously we'll be down at the League as well. So if you want to stop by the DEP's booth and chat with anyone about any of the programs that I've mentioned, just an open invitation to sort of be part of that. I'm sure my email address is in the slide somewhere, but we have a general inbox that we all track climate resilience at dep.nj.gov. So sometimes I find that it's helpful, particularly with a crowd like this that's been working in this space in New Jersey for a number of years and sort of understands the context, to sort of start with where we've come from and what that means for what we're doing. New Jersey's obviously been doing coastal management work, waterfront development work, shore protection type work for Hurricane Sandy is really the moment in our history as a state where we started to be much more intentional about talking about climate impacts and what that means, not only because of our own local experience here, but because of increasing mandates at the federal level to be able to address this work. And what you'll see is that DEP started with the allocation that we get annually federally from NOAA, from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and basically adopted that to create much more opportunities for local work, particularly in the 239 municipalities that are within our coastal and tidally influenced zone, but expanding that over the years. And so when you see the 2019 executive order come out that mandated the creation of my boss's position, Nick Angarone, as the Chief Resilience Officer, and sort of established the framework for statewide policy, this is all building on the success of previous interventions in the coastal zone. And today, New Jersey is, you know, among the leaders in across New Jersey, the United States for effective planning efforts. So Executive Order 89 was signed by Governor Murphy in 2019, and it established a policy that the executive branch will take proactive efforts to build resilience, and created this mandate essentially for the first time. So I'll just read this verbatim because I think it's important to name it. For the first time, the governor made clear that it was the policy of the state of New Jersey that executive branch departments and agencies take proactive and coordinated efforts to protect public health and safety, and to promote and protect the physical, economic, and social vitality and resilience of New Jersey's communities, current and anticipated impacts of climate change. It's a mouthful, but it really sets sort of, in a lot of ways, 2012 and Sandy and a lot of the disasters that happened in the in the early aughts, and then all of the sort of planning work, we're about 10 years into very intentional focus on what climate change means in New Jersey. I actually just read this verbatim. It'll be in the slide deck that folks will receive after the fact. One of the important pieces was the creation of an interagency council. Sorry, I skipped too far ahead. I already mentioned that, one piece of Executive Order 89 was the establishment of Chief Resilience Officer to sort of lead development of a strategy and work across the executive branch to advance that. And then the Interagency Council on Climate Resilience, which is one of my sort of main functions, is helping to staff and facilitate this work, is established to help to coordinate and advance that work, implement the statewide resilience strategy. We started at 17 agencies, we're at 22 now. And I think, again, because it's a crowd of folks that has been working in this space for some time, the names of the entities have changed over the years. The Office of Climate Resilience and the Chief Resilience Officer. There was a previous sort of nomenclature, the Climate and Flood Resilience Program, so just sort of clarifying that for folks. But we were mandated to develop a scientific report, which sort of serves as the science underpinning this work. And we created that. It was released in June of 2020. So if folks are thinking through timeline here, right, just as the world is sort of the world and we are all finding our feet relative to the global pandemic, the department is doing all of this science and research that leads into the creation of a strategy. And so there are a number of reasons that we're really intentional about sort of being out in community, explaining what this strategy entails, what the work of New Jersey state executive branches are relative to this work, because there's this moment in time where we all were sort of focused elsewhere in terms of our families, our towns, our communities. Since the 2020 report, there have been a number of additional scientific findings and reports and studies, et cetera. Just going to call quick attention to the one where we worked in cooperation with the Northeast Regional Climate Center to update our understanding of historic precipitation, as well as do much more intentional projections of precipitation numbers based on the updated observation record. And then in partnership with the New Jersey Department of Environmental Health, DEP's Division of Science and Research created this addendum to the scientific report focused on human health and community. The Human Health and Communities addendum, which is about a year old now, really drives down into how extreme weather, diminished air quality, infectious disease, all of these result in really specific community impacts. So if you do spend some time diving here, you'll get into the details on kinds of, whether it's respiratory illness or kidney disease or cardiovascular impacts of the different things in climate change. So for folks that are really looking to get into the weeds there. And I won't belabor this because I think a lot of these scientific findings are things that folks are familiar with. But prior to Executive Order 89, DEP tasked Rutgers University with establishing a scientific and technical advisory panel. These are experts from throughout New Jersey, and a lot of them are really global experts in this space, to provide us the sort of most likely findings with regards to global emission scenario. So they took a sort of moderate emission scenario and adapted that based on the very sort of localized information to New Jersey. And this table gives you not only a sense of the range for planning, but it gives you a sense for why you are probably regularly hearing 1 foot, 3 foot, 5 foot, right? If you're hearing messaging from DEP about sea level rise, we're often talking about it in those chunks because of the findings from the staff, the scientific and technical advisory panel. There's a tool online called NJ Flood Mapper that you can use to zoom into your community and to see what 1 foot, 2 foot, 3 foot looks like. And I'm sharing this one, I think, because often, and I think a lot of people who spend time in the shore area understand that the source of the flooding from a sea level rise perspective can often be the sort of bay side of the community, because historically our dunes are actually the highest elevation point in some of our communities. Now, with respect to precipitation, so there's sort of the trifecta of issues that are facing New Jersey: sea level rise, increases in precipitation, and increases in heat. A very light touch on all of these. With respect to precipitation, we were using a flood model that looked at data about precipitation up until the year 2020. Now, up until the year 2000. Now, in the 2 decades from 2000 to 2020, there were quite a lot of really heavy storms that we all experienced. And so this study that I mentioned in partnership with Northeast Climate Regional Climate Center at Cornell was really looking to take those 2 decades of information and bring it into our planning landscape. So we find that the frequency of extreme precipitation events and the intensity of extreme precipitation events is considerably higher than we previously anticipated. And there's a URL at the end here that also, allows you to sort of fiddle with the various numbers for local. And lastly, extreme heat. A very simplified graphic that takes 125 years of observed temperature data in New Jersey, very clear trend towards warming. As you can tell here, the blue tone bars are sort of cooler than average years, and the red tone bars indicate warmer than average years. The 10 hottest summers in New Jersey have taken place since 1999. 9 of the hottest have occurred since 2005. There's quite a lot of data available about climate science, and just in the lead up to Climate Week, so last month, basically, maybe 6 weeks ago, we released a new web resource that makes this information, instead of a 400, 500-page report and addendums and appendices, it sort of breaks down the information into different chunks that are of interest to whether it be educators that are implementing New Jersey's new climate change curriculum in schools, or whether it be folks like yourselves. So the scientific report is the underpinning for our strategy. And that strategy is basically focused on promoting the long-term resilience of all of New Jersey's economy, the communities, natural resources, our infrastructure, all of that is sort of captured in the strategy. The strategy defined what we mean by resilience, which is not just bouncing back to sort of a pre-storm condition, which is often what our communities are looking to do, but also bouncing forward and thinking strategically about what needs to happen next. The strategy is divided into 6 priority areas, all of which you can sort of see the titles of here. You can look at it in more detail at the URL provided. I've also provided folks a stack. The Board of Trustees members received a stack that includes a summary of the strategy at a glance, in case you want to review that. The sort of lesser quality paper copy of the scientific report is because we're not really doing paper copies of this as much, given that we have that new web resource out, but that you have that there as well. Now, this strategy was released in October of 2019, so we're a couple years out. We recently, just a couple weeks ago, put out a accomplishments report that just sort of looks at some of the successes that we've seen in the last couple of years from state agency action. So welcome folks to take a look at that as well. And the kinds of actions really get at that broad-based definition of resilience we're talking about. So we'll see examples of expanding technical assistance provisions, even a modifying of a financial risk disclosure that's being used by insurance agencies, promoting and incentivizing resilience through the financial decisions that state agencies are making, coordinating to develop a wetlands program plan that looks at natural resources issues. It's just a huge sort of swath of the ways in which we're approaching resilience work. And what comes next for us, let me do a quick time. What comes next for us is the development of resilience action plans. So we take this strategy, this policy framework that forms the foundation for the work, and turn it into implementable activities. We decided to focus on extreme heat for the first resilience action plan, and that's expected to be released in the spring of 2024. And this is basically a deep dive into the topic of extreme heat. It was really critical for us to start with extreme heat because it didn't get as much sort of treatment when we passed the strategy in October of 2019, and because frankly, extreme heat is one of the deadliest climate hazards that we're facing today. If you sort of take and combine all sorts of extreme weather events, extreme heat kills more than the next 2, 3. And in New Jersey, we're particularly vulnerable to extreme heat. We are warming faster than the region. We're warming faster than the globe. The observed temperature records for New Jersey is that in the last 125 years, whereas the globe has warmed by 1.5 degrees Fahrenheit, we've warmed by 3.5 degrees Fahrenheit. So you see that it's, there's topographical reasons that this map shows up the way it does in terms of trying to downscale that climate data, but New Jersey has certainly an exposure rate that's higher than other parts of the region, the country, the globe. And so when we're talking about, excessive heat and what it means in our communities, we're talking about heat as a threat multiplier. Heat is an issue that's already affecting our overburdened communities even more so. And heat affects everything, absolutely everything that we're talking about, whether it's water supply, whether it's food supply, whether it's infrastructure. And when we did sort of a scan of available plans at the state level, New Jersey is third in line of having, this kind of comprehensive planning framework. New York and California already have documents that are public. The buckets of activities basically fit in one of these three. Work to protect vulnerable populations, work to ensure that our built environment sort of is able to withstand the issues, and work to ensure that our natural systems are functioning and able to help to provide resilience benefits. And one thing that I like about this slide is that if you take the list of outcomes that we're driving towards, this is true regardless of what sort of hazard of concern. We are looking to ensure that there's an increased sense of education and awareness about a given issue. We want to make sure that we can zoom into the areas where we experience vulnerability, whether that's infrastructure assets or whether that's vulnerable populations, and retrofit accordingly, improve the way we coordinate across state agencies and across levels of government, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Again, because we're doing this work as we write these plans, there's a summary document that shares a little bit about what actions are already underway. We'll have the plan in the spring, but this is available online now to sort of point at some of the work that's already done. And I tried my best to not hit you all with a bunch of data and tools because there's so many out there that they're kind of overwhelming. I will say that when it comes to heat, it's often a topic that folks aren't treating as much, that folks aren't sort of dealing with as much. So I wanted to point out that there are a few tools that are available now if you do want to take the time to sort of zoom into your county, to your municipality. This is a map that looks purely at land surface temperature as a proxy for heat, right? So you have satellites that fly over, they're capturing temperature records. These temperature records are from July of 2022, a moment in time. Actually, a couple dates in July 2022 because we had to deal with cloud cover. But you see a sense of where our sort of surfaces are reflecting back, have a higher reflectivity that's keeping our communities very hot. We actually use this as a foundation for a grant application to the Environmental Protection Agency, which we recently was awarded to us in order to help drive some deployment of more, not only temperature sensors, but air quality sensors into our most vulnerable heat communities. And I do want to flag that both Sustainable Jersey and Rutgers have developed tools that take that foundation of land surface temperature and overlay it with key information like vulnerable populations. And in both cases, the tools sort of serve slightly different purposes depending on what it is that you're looking for. In the case of Sustainable Jersey, they're comparing at the county scale. In the case of Rutgers, you can sort of dive deep into, I believe it's census block group, and figure out what's driving the vulnerability to heat in that census block group. Is it that you have a really large number of elders in the community? Is it that the exposure to heat is so high? Just sort of putting it out there. There are some tools that folks can spend some time with if they'd like. Now I'm going to transition into a conversation about our regional planning program, Resilient New Jersey, Resilient NJ, and flagging that you have some handouts about this as well. So there are two sets of handouts regarding Resilient NJ. One is this stapled set of pages, which are one-page summaries of the 4 regional plans, where you can sort of see a little bit about what each of these regions has included in their plan. And then one that summarizes a toolkit that we've developed where anyone, anywhere, regardless of whether or not you got the funding from DEP to do this regional plan, you can use the tools that are compiled into this toolkit to help to advance resilience planning in your community. So what I want to share here is that obviously state state action is critical, but many of you may have heard the adage, all adaptation is local, right? Ultimately, the experience are faced on the ground and the interventions are happening at the ground scale, with state agencies doing our best to sort of help to advance that work, through technical assistance, through training, through provision of data and science, etc. So the Office of Climate Resilience runs this Resilient NJ program as a comprehensive technical assistance program that supports the local and the regional folks when they're doing their activities. We've got our planning program, which is for regions, sort of large scale soup to nuts. We've got the municipal assistance program, which is sort of builds on the regional work, but gets into the detail with specific municipalities. And then we've got the tool mentioned. And again, you have handouts for these, so I won't go into huge amount of detail on these folks. But these are the 4 regional planning projects, 3 of which are in your region. So with the exception of the Atlantic County coastal region, every other series of municipalities and the plans that they produced are within the MPO's operating. When we're talking about regional planning, this is essentially, we all sort of know what it takes to plan. We are driving towards implementing these actions. So the grants that were available to communities that applied back in, I think it was 2018, 2019, the project planning started in 2020. Those plans, a third of the budget was set aside for implementation of activities. And so when you dive in, you see how they use some of the planning grant dollars in order to sort of roll up your sleeves and just start. We actually were able to secure additional funding, which came through to those communities to continue the work. It was really deeply based on community engagement and sort of understanding the needs on the ground, as well as risk assessments that were using the best available science that DEP had. So here we have a look out to 2070. These particular plans are looking out to a 2070 sea level rise and increased precipitation scenario, and putting some numbers to what it would look like if we had another Sandy event in 2070. Where our estimates just for these 4 regions alone is that a Sandy-like event in 2070 would cause as much as $45 billion in damages. And by comparison, the entire state of New Jersey had $30 billion in damages in 2012. So the plan is developed around this idea of sort of creating scenarios that pull together various types of actions that will sit in the space of sort of physical interventions, policy interventions, as well as sort of social programs. And because you guys have these handouts, I won't sort of sit in each of these slides for very long, but just naming that, we've already seen some really great successes come out of these regional plans, including, a perfect batting average for the Northeast region, application to FEMA Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities grant programs, where we've seen 21 million for implementation projects come to Hoboken, Jersey City, Newark, and Bayonne. We've seen sort of a deepening of partnerships in the Raritan River Bay community, where there's an extensive risk communication program that is engaging a variety of folks that might not have been engaged otherwise, and using that information to go straight into resilience redevelopment efforts. At an LBI, this is a community where the planning has to happen regionally, right? If one community does something, the next community doesn't. That's not building resilience. The shore communities there, with a concept plan being the sort of one of the main keystone takeaway projects from this. And I'll skip Atlantic County since it's outside of your region. So what's next for us is a continuation of funding, right? Those 4 regions were able to secure additional fundings that came to us from HUD's Community Development Block Grant Program for disasters, as well as additional funding that's coming to the Coastal Management Program to help more communities go through a really intentional, risk-centered vulnerability assessment. As I mentioned, we have the Municipal Assistance Program that started with 5 and are now expanding to 14 additional communities, right, sort of as we speak, as well as a variety of programs nonprofit organizations. I wanted to flag this. Folks are probably familiar again that we have a new amendment to the municipal land use law that requires climate change related hazard vulnerability assessments, CCR-HVAs for folks that are using that acronym, incorporated into any new land elements in a master plan. And our team's funding, whenever we're contracting with technical assistance providers to do this, we're being really intentional to ensure that there's sort of an ability to use the outcomes of the regional NJ efforts in the master plan. You have a copy of the toolkits brochure, so just flagging all the information that's available online, starting with understanding vulnerability, going through how best to sort of apply that work on the ground. And now I'll pivot for just the last few minutes, and I'm sorry that I've gone for longer than I intended, about the Blue Acres program. I believe some postcards made it around to folks. We have plenty of these. You can go to the booth and get a bunch more if you're going to go to the league tomorrow, but definitely share this information for our voluntary flood acquisition program. Since Sandy, we have had about 800 homes, totaling $203 million flood protection. So this is helping those homeowners, those individual property owners sort of secure new homes, because it is a program that not only are we purchasing the flood impacted home from a disaster, but we're helping folks to sort of transition to higher ground, to safer areas. And now what we call Blue Acres 3.0 is transitioning us even further into a really intentional municipal scale resilience planning. So if you get a few municipalities together, you can create a sort of stormwater flood park, or really intentional in one area to lessen the scale of the problem. So moving forward, whereas before we were fully responsive and only getting our funding from federally declared disasters, our intention into the future is that we can talk about disaster recovery as well as preparedness for the next disaster, and think in clusters in order to be able to do that planning that allows us to build resilience. And then to end, I just wanted to show folks a few sort of images of the various risk communication campaigns. I think when we're in leadership positions and able to sort of drive planning interventions, you are often doing that in a way that's highly technical, often highly bureaucratic, and often hard for just your sort of regular everyday person to understand. And so we've got a number of campaigns that are focused on moving from hard data to a sort of more like an everyday understanding. So our community-based art program has funded a number of nonprofit organizations and artists to sort of drive home what it is that we're talking about. And these are just some images from various programs. And then we also have a social media campaign that focuses not only on tides, but sunny day flooding. And here we're inviting people to use an app and to use various stations located in state parks to take a photo of the changing shoreline. And that concludes my remarks. Thank you so much.